On our wedding night, he said, "You'll adjust. People like you always do." I laughed then. Now, I see it was a warning. I was 27, standing in a room full of roses, diamonds, and strangers who spoke in polished tones I couldn't imitate if I tried. I remember tracing the lace of my wedding dress, pretending the chill crawling down my spine was just nerves. My husband, Daniel, looked like success incarnate. Tall, charming, with a smile that could open doors I never even knew existed. I had spent my life opening windows just to let in air. He was the kind of man my small-town mother called a miracle. The first months were bliss, or at least they looked that way in photos. Luxury dinners, weekend trips to Paris, designer dresses that never felt like mine. He would say, "You look perfect in this. Elegant, not like before." I thought it was affection, his way of bringing me into his world. When he corrected my pronunciation at parties or gently teased my cute little accent, I blushed, convinced it was love dressed as laughter. I told myself I was lucky. He'd chosen me, a girl from a town where Friday night diners were the highlight of entertainment, to stand beside him in his world of glass towers and art galleries. I wanted so badly to belong that I mistook pity for admiration. When he laughed as I stumbled over a French menu, I told myself it was part of the learning curve. "You'll adjust," he'd repeat like a mantra, and I believed him. The apartment he bought us overlooked the skyline, all glass and silence. I tried filling it with warmth, homemade dinners, music, little jokes, but he preferred quiet sophistication. He'd smile thinly when I talked too much about home or my parents' farm, saying, "You're adorable when you get sentimental." Adorable. Like a pet, not a partner. At first, I ignored the unease. Every woman dreams of a man who can provide, I told myself. Every marriage takes adjustment. When my friends from back home called, I lied about being busy. I didn't want them to hear the emptiness in my voice, the echo of rooms too big for laughter. I didn't want to admit that love wrapped in luxury could still feel so cold. One evening, as I set the table for dinner, Daniel glanced up from his laptop. "You don't have to cook," he said. "We can just have the chef do it." "It's not your thing." I froze, ladle in hand, realizing he didn't mean convenience. He meant class. He didn't want my effort. He wanted display. That night, I stared at my reflection in the mirrored wall, studying the diamond necklace around my neck. It sparkled like proof that I'd made it, but the eyes above it looked lost, dimmer than before. I whispered, "You're happy," just to hear the words out loud. He called it refinement. I called it love. But underneath, I felt something shifting. A quiet dissonance between who I was and who he wanted me to be. Sometimes I caught myself rehearsing words before speaking, terrified of sounding wrong. When I misused a term, he'd smile and correct me in front of his friends. I laughed it off even when it burned. Once during a dinner, someone asked where I studied. I said, "Community college." Daniel added, "She's self-taught in charm." Everyone chuckled. I smiled, tasting humiliation under the wine. Late at night, I'd lie beside him, listening to the hum of the city. His breathing was steady, confident. Mine was shallow, pretending peace. I told myself this was the price of transformation, that I was evolving, not erasing. But love shouldn't feel like translation. The night before our 6-month anniversary, I found an old photo of myself, jeans, ponytail, wide smile. I barely recognized her. Daniel came in, glanced at it, and said, "You've come a long way." He meant it as praise. I heard it as distance. I placed the picture back in the drawer and smiled at him. Because what else could I do? In his world, silence was survival. I told myself again, "You're lucky. You're chosen." But deep down, I already knew. I was just adjusting, exactly as he said I would. The first time he handed me a credit card, it felt like freedom. "So you won't have to ask," he said, pressing the sleek black plastic into my palm. I didn't realize it was a leash disguised as luxury. Every purchase went through his assistant. Every transaction came with a comment. "Do you really need another dress? You wore something similar last month." Soon I stopped buying anything that wasn't for him. My wardrobe became his taste curated through my body. Neutral tones, fitted silhouettes, the kind of elegance that whispered submission. He said I made him look balanced. His friends' wives were sharp, competitive, and perfectly controlled. I was his softness, his calm accessory. At events, he would rest his hand on the small of my back like ownership, not affection. I smiled for photos, held champagne flutes I never finished, and nodded at conversations I didn't belong in. When people laughed at his jokes about my cute accent or my small-town perspective, I laughed too. It was easier than explaining that every word carved a little deeper into my self-worth. At home, he curated my world the way he managed his business portfolio, efficiently and without room for negotiation. My days revolved around routines: yoga at the private club, coffee with other wives, waiting for him to text me back. I had no key to the office in our apartment, no password to the accounts. I told myself it was trust. It was control. Sometimes I'd look at the skyline from our balcony and wonder how I'd gone from dreaming about making a difference to counting compliments like currency. Daniel liked me best when I was quiet. "You're most beautiful when you just listen," he'd say. So I listened. To him, to his friends, to the endless stories of deals, mergers, and success. My world shrank around his voice. The dinner parties were the worst. They were performances, stages built on polished floors and false laughter. I'd stand beside him as he poured wine, introducing me with that practiced charm. "This is my wife, my grounding force. She keeps me humble," he'd say, and the men would chuckle knowingly. The women would smile politely, scanning my outfit for validation or weakness. I learned to smile back, to pretend I didn't notice the pity in their eyes. One night, at a particularly grand event, he decided to play what he called his favorite game. He asked everyone at the table to share a funny story about their spouses. When it was his turn, he said, "When I first met her, I thought she was the caterer." Laughter erupted. I laughed too, swallowing the sting that rose like bile. Afterward, he leaned in and whispered, "You're such a good sport. That's what I love about you." That night, I stood under the shower until the water ran cold. I watched my makeup dissolve down the drain, black rivers of mascara tracing the pattern of my exhaustion. The apartment felt like a museum of silence, everything in its place, polished, untouchable. I whispered into the steam, "Is this love or captivity?" But the only answer was the hum of the city outside, a life still moving while mine stood still. He chose my friends carefully. Anyone from my past was not our kind, and the women he approved of were carbon copies, manicured, elegant, and quietly miserable. Their laughter was brittle, their eyes tired. We complimented each other's dresses like it mattered. Maybe it did. When your worth is measured in appearances, fabric becomes armor. I started to keep secrets, small rebellions that reminded me I still existed. A cup of coffee from a cheap cafe instead of the hotel one he preferred, reading books he'd call pretentious. Writing thoughts in a hidden journal, though I never signed my name. I found comfort in the anonymity of my own handwriting, the only thing still mine. One afternoon, I overheard him on a call, saying, "She's perfect for the image. Gentle, grateful, harmless. Gentle, grateful, harmless." I mouthed the words over and over until they stopped sounding human. That night, I wore a red dress he once called too loud and watched his expression tighten when I walked into the room. "Trying something new?" he asked. "Just being myself," I said softly. He laughed. "Don't start playing at rebellion. It doesn't suit you." But it did. For a moment, I felt alive again. Still, when he placed his hand on my back at the next event, I froze. His touch was lighter now, but the weight was heavier than ever. The other guests saw a power couple. I saw a contract of silence. I smiled for the cameras because that's what a perfect wife does. She shines where she's told and dims when it's over. Every compliment I received came with a hidden insult. "You're lucky Daniel takes such good care of you." Yes, he took care. Of my words, my clothes, my future. I was an accessory polished to reflect him better. A trophy that learned how to smile without teeth. One night, as he laughed with his colleagues, I caught my reflection in a glass wall. Elegant, still, hollow. a mannequin in designer skin. I wondered when I'd stopped recognizing the woman inside. Then it hit me. I hadn't stopped recognizing her. I'd buried her under all the glitter he called love. The gala was supposed to be a celebration, his company's biggest milestone yet. The ballroom glimmered with chandeliers and champagne, filled with the kind of people who thought success was proof of virtue. I spent the day preparing, rehearsing smiles, straightening the dress he chose, adjusting to the image he wanted. Refined, grateful, obedient. I told myself I was proud of him, that the ache in my chest was admiration, not erasure. The night began like all the others. Cameras flashing, hands shaking, laughter echoing over the clink of glasses. Daniel loved that world. The glitter, the applause, the validation. I stood beside him, the silent punctuation to his charisma. He was magnetic, and I was expected to orbit him, glowing only when he let me. When it was time for his speech, he took the stage with practiced ease. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not just success, but the people who believed in it, my team, my partners, and my wife." My heart fluttered. Maybe, just maybe, he'd finally see me. For a moment the room blurred and I believed something kind might follow. Then he smiled, that razor-sharp grin everyone mistook for charm. "When I married her," he said, "I'll admit, I married beneath my class, but far above my expectations." Laughter exploded like fireworks. I froze, the air thick with heat and humiliation. Cameras flashed. People looked at me, waiting for my reaction. I smiled, the same rehearsed, brittle smile that had saved me before. My throat tightened, but I swallowed the ache and lifted my glass, pretending it was all in good humor. I felt every second stretch into eternity as I stood there, applauding the man who just reduced me to a punchline. He came down from the stage, kissed my cheek, and whispered, "See? They love us. Us. There was no us. There was only him, and the shell of me that made him look complete." Afterward, as guests mingled, people offered hollow compliments. "You're such a good sport," one woman said. Another leaned in, whispering, "Don't take it personally. Men like him, they need to feel powerful." I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled again. Always smiling, that was my survival instinct. When we returned home, the silence was deafening. He poured himself a drink, still glowing from the night's attention. "You were perfect," he said casually. "You make things easy for me." Easy. That word landed heavier than any insult. I nodded and excused myself, my voice calm while something inside me splintered quietly. I walked down the hall to the guest room, a space I'd always avoided because it felt too final, too lonely. But that night it felt safe. I slipped out of the dress, the sequins scratching my skin, leaving faint marks that looked like evidence. I stood before the mirror, barefaced, stripped of every performance, and whispered, "Who are you?" The woman staring back didn't answer. She just looked tired. Tired of shrinking. Tired of pretending gratitude was love. Lying in that cold bed, I replayed the moment he mocked me in front of hundreds. How easily the room had laughed. How willingly I'd let it happen. But something shifted. The humiliation burned, yes, but beneath it something fierce began to stir. Not rage yet, not revenge. Just awareness. The smallest flicker of self that refused to die quietly. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who believed love could be earned if she was patient enough, kind enough, small enough. I mourned her that night. She'd done her best and it wasn't enough. But maybe that wasn't her fault. Maybe it was never supposed to be. When he came to bed hours later, he didn't notice my absence. He smelled like cologne and arrogance. He climbed in beside me, muttering, "Long night," before drifting to sleep. I watched him in the dark, his chest rising and falling, the rhythm steady, unbothered. I realized then how peaceful it must feel to destroy someone without ever realizing you did. Tears welled but didn't fall. I was done crying for him, done waiting for an apology that would never come. I closed my eyes and made myself a silent promise that the next time he tried to humiliate me, he wouldn't find the same woman standing beside him. He had no idea that humiliation would become my turning point. It started with a whisper, a voice inside me I hadn't heard in years. Faint, hesitant, but persistent. After that humiliating gala, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every cruel joke, every reminder of my place, echoed differently now. They no longer broke me, they fueled me. I began to see the small cracks in his fortress of control. He thought he'd built a life so luxurious I'd never dream of leaving. But he didn't understand that when someone takes everything from you, even silence can become a weapon. One morning, while he was at work, I sat in the corner of our spotless kitchen and stared at my laptop. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, trembling. I hadn't made a decision this bold in years, but when I typed online business courses for beginners, it felt like opening a secret door. The idea of learning again, of having something that was mine, was intoxicating. I remembered my friend Lena from college, one of the few people he allowed me to speak to, because she lived abroad and posed no threat. She had built her own consulting firm, a quiet success story he dismissed whenever her name came up. She's lucky, he'd say. Most women can't handle independence. That line had stuck with me. So one afternoon I messaged her. Lena, I typed, do you think it's too late to start over? Her reply came within minutes. It's never too late. Just don't ask for permission. That message ignited something. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I felt seen. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, I opened my laptop again. The sound of his steady breathing became my soundtrack. I enrolled in a 6-week course on business management and digital finance. My heart pounded as I entered my credit card information, the card he never checked because it was too trivial for real expenses. The irony made me smile. Every night after that, I studied in silence. I read about branding, online sales, investment basics, words that once intimidated me but now felt like keys. I took notes, whispered terms under my breath, practiced explaining concepts aloud in the mirror. I wasn't just learning. I was rebuilding myself, piece by piece. He'd sometimes wake up and find me in the study. Still awake? He'd mutter. I'd smile softly. Just reading. He'd nod and go back to bed, assuming I was indulging in some harmless hobby. If only he knew that each page I turned was another brick in the wall I was building between us. A wall of knowledge. Confidence and quiet revenge. Lena checked in regularly, giving me assignments, challenging me to think bigger. Start something small, she said. Something online. Something he won't notice at first. The idea terrified me and thrilled me at once. We brainstormed late at night over voice messages, my whispers barely audible so I wouldn't wake him. That's how the idea of the digital boutique was born. A curated online store selling handmade accessories sourced from women-owned startups. It was poetic, really. The man who'd mocked my small-town roots and told me I'd never rise to his level was about to watch me build an empire from my laptop, in the same house he thought was my cage. There were setbacks, of course. Nights I doubted myself, fearing I'd fail and prove him right. But then I'd think of that night at the gala, his smirk, the laughter. I'd whisper to myself, "You're not beneath anyone." Those words became my mantra. In the quiet hours of dawn, while the city outside slept, I worked. I built a name, designed a logo, reached out to suppliers. I used the same discipline I once spent trying to please him. Only now, it served me. The silence he had weaponized to control me had become my sanctuary, the rhythm of my rebellion. Every sale notification felt like a small victory, a heartbeat of freedom. And though I said nothing, I began to carry myself differently, shoulders straighter, gaze steadier. He noticed. "You seem different lately," he said one morning over coffee. I smiled faintly. "Just learning new things." He laughed, dismissive. "Let's not get carried away, darling." But I was already gone, at least in spirit. I had crossed an invisible threshold, the one between obedience and awakening. I was no longer the woman who needed his approval. I was becoming someone who didn't need his permission to breathe. It happened on a Thursday evening. Ordinary. Almost peaceful. I was in the study, reviewing an assignment about cash flow models. the kind of thing that used to make my head spin but now thrilled me. I didn't hear him come in until his voice cut through the silence. "What's this?" His tone was curious at first, almost amused. My heart stuttered. He was holding my open laptop, my course dashboard glowing on the screen. He leaned back in my chair, scrolling. "Business management? Finance? Oh, sweetheart." He laughed, that low, rich laugh that used to charm me but now only scraped against my nerves. "You think you can compete in my world?" His words dripped condescension, the same flavor he'd used at parties, but this time something in me refused to absorb it. A few months earlier, I would have stammered an apology, tried to explain it was just a hobby. But now I just watched him, calm and still. I felt something strange, not fear, not even anger, just clarity. He was so predictable, so fragile behind his arrogance. He kept scrolling through my notes, mocking little phrases out loud. Branding strategy, market segmentation. Oh, that's cute. He turned to me, grinning. "You don't have to play pretend, darling. You have me for that. Why waste time on this nonsense?" I wanted to laugh with him, not because his words were funny, but because I finally saw it. The man who once seemed untouchable was terrified. Not of me as I was, but of who I might become. He sensed the shift, the quiet distance growing between us, and he needed to crush it before it bloomed. Instead of defending myself, I smiled. Just a faint, steady curve of the lips. It startled him more than shouting ever could. "You're right," I said softly. "It's probably nothing." Then I closed my notebook and took the laptop from his hands. For the first time, he didn't stop me. He watched me closely, his smirk faltering. "You know, you've been different lately," he said, trying to sound casual. "Don't forget who you are, okay?" I met his gaze. "I'm starting to remember exactly who I am." He chuckled again, masking unease with arrogance. "Cute. You'll get over this little phase." But his voice lacked its usual confidence. He looked at me a second too long before walking away, muttering something about dinner reservations. When the door closed, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. For years, his laughter had been my leash, the sound that reminded me I was small. But that night, it became something else entirely. Proof of his weakness. He laughed because he didn't understand what I was building. He laughed because he still believed he owned my silence. I returned to my desk, opened the laptop, and stared at the blinking cursor. My reflection stared back from the screen, not defeated, not scared, just steady. His laughter still echoed faintly in my ears, but instead of wounding me, it fueled me. I whispered to myself, "Let him laugh." Because underneath that cruel amusement, I'd seen it, the flicker of fear in his eyes. He knew I was slipping away. He just didn't realize how far I'd already gone. It began almost timidly, a whisper of a dream folded into late nights and borrowed time. The moment he discovered my coursework, I realized that survival meant invisibility. If I wanted freedom, I'd have to build it in the dark, brick by digital brick, behind the mask of his indifference. My laptop became my lifeline. By day, it sat innocently on the kitchen counter, open to recipes or news articles. By night, when the house fell quiet and his snoring filled the hallway, it came alive with possibility. I gave myself a new name, Evelyn Cross. A name that sounded like someone with a vision, not a victim. Under that pseudonym, I registered a small e-commerce brand. I called it Lunar, after the moon, because like the moon, I'd learned to shine when no one was watching. My first product was simple, handmade accessories inspired by the kind of elegance I'd once thought I needed him to provide. A collection of silk scarves, beaded bracelets, and personalized charms sourced from women artisans I found through Lena's contacts. I wrote every product description myself, every word carrying pieces of me I couldn't say out loud. Resilience, grace, defiance. The first week, there were no sales. Just silence and doubt. But I kept at it, photographing products by the window, editing pictures in the dim glow of the screen. I studied SEO, influencer outreach, and pricing psychology while he watched TV in the other room. Every click, every new skill felt like reclaiming an inch of stolen ground. Then, one morning, I woke to a notification. My first sale. Someone in Oregon had bought a scarf. Just one. But it felt monumental. I pressed a hand to my chest and whispered, "Thank you, not to the buyer, but to myself, for not giving up." That sale became 2, then 5, then 20. A small fashion influencer reposted one of my designs, calling it a symbol of quiet confidence. I smiled at that. She had no idea how literal her words were. From that moment, orders began trickling in faster. I packaged them myself, each order wrapped neatly in tissue paper, tied with a ribbon, and sealed with a handwritten thank you note signed, E. During the day, Daniel would glance over and smirk. "You're glued to that laptop lately. Don't tell me you've joined one of those online shopping obsessions." He'd laugh, then go back to his phone, oblivious. I laughed too, a little too easily. But inside I was trembling with secret triumph. He thought I was wasting time. Let him. His ignorance was my camouflage. One afternoon, he walked past as I printed shipping labels. "You really enjoy this little hobby, huh?" he said, his tone dismissive, his smile the same practiced one he gave waiters. "It's cute that you have something to keep you busy." I nodded, keeping my voice light. "It keeps me happy." And that was true, just not in the way he imagined. When the money started coming in, I faced a new challenge, keeping it hidden. I opened a separate bank account under my business alias, the name he'd never question. I remembered the first time I held that small, sleek bank card in my hand. The weight of it felt unreal. It wasn't just plastic. It was independence. I slipped it into the lining of an old purse, one he'd told me to throw away years ago. Somehow, that made it perfect. Each deposit, no matter how small, felt like a heartbeat of freedom. I tracked every cent, watched the balance grow with the same quiet awe I once reserved for his paychecks. Except this time, the numbers represented me. My work, my choices, my survival. Lena cheered me on from afar. "You're doing it," she'd text. "You're really doing it." I'd reply with a photo of my growing order list, and she'd send back a string of heart emojis. She called my progress shadow work, building strength in secret until it's too powerful to hide. I liked that term. It felt like poetry. Weeks turned into months. My nights blurred into dawns filled with packaging tape, invoices, and the hum of the printer. There were moments of exhaustion, guilt even. Sneaking around felt dishonest. But then I'd remember his words. "You think you can compete in my world?" And the guilt melted into resolve. He continued underestimating me, parading his wealth and superiority at every chance. I played the part, smiling at dinner parties, asking about his projects, pretending to be fascinated by numbers I secretly understood better than he thought. But every time he bragged, I felt a private spark inside. I'm building something too. Sometimes, when he fell asleep on the couch after a long night of drinking, I'd look at him, this man who believed he owned me, and feel nothing but distance. I'd whisper softly, "Thank you," not for his love, but for his cruelty. It was his underestimation that had set me free. By the end of that year, Lunar had turned its first real profit. Not millions, not yet, but enough to live on. Enough to prove that I could survive without his money, his name, or his permission. I stood in the kitchen one morning, sipping coffee as he scrolled through his phone, unaware that the woman beside him was no longer trapped. He had no idea that while he built his empire in the daylight, I had been quietly constructing my own. In the shadows, lit only by the glow of a laptop and the fire of my determination. The first whisper came through a business newsletter I accidentally left open on the kitchen counter. Daniel's company was under investigation. Unpaid taxes, questionable contracts, and a PR scandal that had the tabloids snapping like vultures. At first I froze. The man who had always been untouchable, whose every decision seemed flawless, was suddenly vulnerable. Vulnerable in a way I had never seen, and secretly I felt a thrill I couldn't name aloud. He came home that evening, hair slightly disheveled, pacing like a lion in a cage. His phone never left his hand, his jaw tight, lips pressed into a thin line. "They're exaggerating," he muttered when I asked casually about the news. I nodded, smiling. "I'm sure it'll be fine." He glared at me, a flicker of suspicion in his eyes. That night, I watched him in silence, the same way he had once observed my smallest mistakes, ready to pounce. Meanwhile, my little digital boutique was on fire. Influencers with thousands of followers began posting my accessories online. I'd wake up to hundreds of notifications, orders flooding in from across the country. Each message, each positive review, each repost was a quiet rebellion I reveled in. I didn't announce it. I didn't brag. I smiled softly when a delivery was confirmed, knowing the irony. While he scrambled to salvage his public image, I was quietly ascending. One afternoon, Lena called over video chat. "You're trending," she said, practically bouncing in her chair. "This investor I know is interested. They want to meet you for a partnership." I could hear the disbelief in her voice, as if my success should have been impossible. I laughed quietly. "Impossible is exactly what they all thought," I replied. That week, Daniel spent hours on conference calls, lawyers pacing around him, reporters calling, investors backing away. His empire, meticulously built, suddenly felt brittle. I watched him from across the apartment, pretending to check emails on my laptop while my orders kept multiplying. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The contrast was already stark. He complained about the stress at dinner, his voice low but sharp. "Sometimes I wonder how people manage in this world without networks, capital, or influence," he said, unaware I had all three in my hands, quietly building my own empire. I smiled and nodded, letting him think he still towered over me. But in my heart I knew the truth. For the first time I was free to grow without his shadow looming over every decision. By the weekend he was exhausted. Journalists camped outside his office, friends whispered warnings, and competitors sensed weakness. At the same time, I finalized my first wholesale deal, expanding my brand into stores he couldn't touch, and signing an investor who admired Lunar for its authenticity and potential. I kept my smile polite when he mentioned work stress. He had no idea that while he clawed to regain control, I was climbing higher, silently unstoppable. Contrast framed everything now. Where he once held power, I held autonomy. Where he controlled perception, I controlled reality. And while his world trembled under scrutiny, mine expanded under faith, patience, and courage he had never allowed me to develop. Late at night, I would sit with my laptop open, sales notifications pinging softly in the dark, and reflect on the irony. The man who had once dictated my every step now struggled to maintain his footing, while the woman he dismissed as naive and helpless thrived quietly in his very apartment. The air had shifted. I could feel it. The balance had changed. By the time Daniel's board called an emergency meeting, I had already prepared the documents for my next investor pitch, confident, unshaken, and for the first time, truly untouchable. My ascent was not loud, but it was undeniable, and in that quiet, almost poetic symmetry, I realized something profound. His empire might be crumbling, but mine was rising, and he had no idea I was building it. It wasn't a secret anymore. Daniel's affair had become a public spectacle, whispered about at parties, posted in gossip columns, and flaunted on social media. A socialite with a smile too bright for sincerity, she paraded around him as if she'd been waiting her whole life for this opportunity. At first, part of me wanted to confront him, to scream, to collapse under the weight of humiliation. But the new me, the woman who had built her life in silence, who had nurtured her independence, didn't flinch. I had already won in ways he could never understand. I watched him one evening at a charity gala, laughing with her like she was his greatest conquest. The old ache threatened to rise, memories of every insult, every belittlement. But I held my posture, smiled for the cameras, and allowed the humiliation to roll off my shoulders. The fire inside me had shifted. Pain was no longer the enemy. It was fuel. That night, after returning home, I reached out to a lawyer. I had done my research quietly over the past months, knowing that if I ever needed an exit, I had to be prepared. The prenup was cruelly thorough. It granted me nothing. All the jewelry, the apartment, the vacations, none of it legally belonged to me. But as I sat across from the attorney, explaining my situation, I realized how irrelevant it had become. The wealth I had built through Lunar, the business I nurtured in the shadows, exceeded even the fortune he flaunted. I didn't need him. I had never needed him. I planned the exit meticulously. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a tearful begging. Just a quiet, controlled departure. My bags were packed in advance, my documents ready, my accounts untouched by his knowledge. Every detail was calculated to preserve my dignity and my newfound power. For the first time, I felt untethered. He continued to strut around, believing he still held the upper hand. He sent messages that were sharp with faux concern. "Are you okay? You don't seem yourself." He assumed panic or desperation, that I would cling to him despite the betrayal. How little he knew. On the day I left, I dressed simply. No designer, no hint of opulence, just clean lines and quiet confidence. I kissed him lightly on the cheek, a gesture that belied everything I was thinking. "Thank you," I said softly. He froze, expecting tears, a plea, a collapse. Instead, he got calm, measured words. "You've freed me," I added. "I'm ready to live my life." He blinked, caught off guard, and for a brief moment, I saw the shock behind the arrogance, the realization that control had slipped through his fingers. He thought I'd beg him to stay. I just thanked him for freeing me. As I walked out, suitcase in hand, I felt no anger. Not yet. What I felt was clarity, a deep, exhilarating sense of ownership over my own life. The betrayal he flaunted so proudly had become the catalyst for my liberation. Every insult, every dismissive laugh, every public humiliation had led to this moment. Freedom. And in the quiet hum of the elevator taking me down to the street, I knew something else. This was only the beginning. I had survived, but now I would thrive. The life I had once imagined, the one he had mocked me for daring to dream, was finally mine to build. Without apology, without fear, without him. Months passed like a tide I had learned to ride quietly. My mornings began with shipments, emails, and meetings with investors I had cultivated carefully, each call reinforcing the life I had built from scratch. The sleepless nights, the secret bank account, the whispered strategy sessions with Lena, all of it had led to this. Lunar had grown beyond a small boutique. It was now a brand recognized for vision, quality, and authenticity. And finally, the world was taking notice. It happened during an awards gala in New York, a glittering event celebrating global entrepreneurship. I had been nominated months earlier, a quiet thrill I had kept to myself. As I walked onto the stage to accept the award for Innovative Digital Business of the Year, the applause washed over me like a tidal wave. I stood there in a tailored suit. No diamonds, no extravagant dress, feeling more radiant than any jewelry could have made me. The crowd cheered, and in that moment I realized I had earned everything with my own hands. When the microphones were shoved toward me, I spoke clearly, deliberately. This award is for anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed. You can rise, you can create, you can thrive, even when the world tells you otherwise. Cameras flashed, capturing not just my words but the fire behind them. My story, a woman rising from a controlling marriage, building her empire in secret, was already trending on social media before I left the stage. Within hours, news outlets featured me on their websites. From trophy wife to trailblazer, how she built a business while married to wealth, the woman who outgrew him. Headlines celebrated independence, resilience, and courage. I read each one, sipping coffee in my modest office, and smiled. Daniel's name was barely mentioned. My life no longer revolved around him. I had outgrown him in ways he would never understand. Calls and emails poured in, investors, journalists, even former friends reaching out to reconnect. Some wanted interviews. Others wanted advice. Every message reminded me of the power of quiet work, the kind that doesn't need validation from the people who once mocked you. I had discovered that success was sweeter when it was your own. Even social media couldn't contain the momentum. Posts with the hashtag #RiseLikeEvelyn went viral, each story echoing mine, overcoming control, abuse, and ridicule to reclaim autonomy. I read messages from women all over the world, writing about how my journey inspired them. "I'm starting my own business now," one said. "I never thought I could until I saw you." Another, "You make me believe in myself again." The empathy and solidarity were overwhelming. And for the first time, I realized my story mattered beyond my own life. Meanwhile, Daniel's colleagues began to notice the shift. At networking events, whispers followed my name. "She's the woman who outgrew him," they'd say, half in admiration, half in disbelief. I heard the rumors, of course, and when they reached him, I saw the faintest trace of unease in his eyes, a recognition that the woman he had once dismissed was now untouchable in her own right. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Every deal, every award, every story published was a reminder that I had created value without his influence. My ascent was its own argument, louder than any confrontation. He had built an empire on control. I had built one on courage. That evening, after the award ceremony, I sat in my office overlooking the city skyline. The lights reflected off my laptop screen, my silent partner in all this triumph. I thought about the months of secrecy, the stolen hours, the quiet labor that had brought me here. The contrast between my past and present was vivid. The timid girl who once adjusted to survive now stood center stage, recognized, respected, and unstoppable. For the first time in my life, I felt complete. The world was watching, applauding, and understanding, and I owed it all to the nights I had dared to work in shadows. The woman who had once shrunk to survive was now a beacon, a testament to resilience, strategy, and self-worth. And as the city lights twinkled like stars beyond my window, I whispered to myself, "This is only the beginning." It was a crisp afternoon at the annual Luxury Expo, the kind of event Daniel once dominated with charm, influence, and wealth. I walked in under my own name this time, flanked by my team, assistants carrying portfolios, photographers capturing the launch of our newest collection, and investors discussing upcoming collaborations. Every step I took radiated confidence, a stark contrast to the timid figure he once knew. For years I had existed in his shadow, shrinking, smiling, bending. Today, I was the sunlight, illuminating my own path. He spotted me the moment I entered the grand hall. For a fraction of a second, I caught the flicker of recognition in his eyes, a hesitation that wasn't there before. He straightened his suit, trying to mask surprise with poise, his usual charm armor glinting in the chandeliers. He approached slowly, a practiced smile plastered on his face. "Evelyn," he said, voice smooth, as if time had never passed. "You look still beautiful in your way." I paused, letting his words linger like a fine mist, allowing the weight of the past to settle. He expected warmth, vulnerability, perhaps a flicker of longing, a mirror of the woman he once thought he controlled. Instead, I smiled, serene and deliberate. "In my world," I said softly, letting my voice carry through the small space between us, "beauty isn't currency. Power is." He blinked, the phrase landing like a quiet blow. The crowd around us noticed nothing of the history, only the composure and elegance I radiated. Cameras flashed as my assistants coordinated, showing our latest designs, discussing strategies, while he stood there, momentarily lost. For the first time, he wasn't the center of attention. The room wasn't about his empire, it was about mine. He attempted casual conversation, questions about the expo, nods to our shared acquaintances. But the confidence he expected from me never returned. I answered politely, but each word was measured, precise, controlled, a demonstration of the woman who had grown beyond his reach. His subtle jabs, the same ones that used to pierce me, now ricocheted harmlessly. I had built shields from experience, knowledge, and independence. His attempts at dominance fell flat. For a moment, I allowed myself a private reflection. I remembered the dinners, the mocking smiles, the gala that had broken me. I remembered sleeping in the guest room, feeling hollow, building a life in silence. And now, standing here, he could see the transformation but had no power over it. That was the true victory. He witnessed my rise without ever having had a hand in it. He tried one last effort, a soft, almost intimate tone. "You've changed," he murmured. "I didn't expect this." There was awe there, mingled with regret, but I didn't offer pity. I only offered a small, knowing smile, the kind that conveys everything words cannot. "Change isn't given," I said. "It's earned." He opened his mouth to speak, then paused. There was nothing he could say to reclaim the narrative, no witty remark, no charm, no reminder of wealth or influence. All the control he had wielded for years had dissolved quietly, like sand slipping through fingers. I had become a living example of resilience, strategy, and self-determination. The encounter ended with civility, yes, but the balance of power had shifted irreversibly. He returned to his group, laughter forced, eyes occasionally flicking toward me, trying to gauge how much of me was still the girl he knew. But the woman before him was someone he could neither belittle nor own. She existed entirely on her own terms. As I moved through the expo, showing our designs, shaking hands with clients, and receiving congratulations from journalists, I felt a profound sense of calm triumph. The poetic justice wasn't in a public argument or dramatic confrontation. It was in the quiet, unshakable fact that I had risen, and he had nothing to do with it. The power had shifted and he could only watch. That day, I realized fully that my journey, from humiliation to self-made success, from silence to spotlight, had been my revenge, delivered with grace, strategy, and absolute certainty. And in that certainty, I finally felt free. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Daniel had remarried. The woman was young, beautiful, and as I quickly gathered, entirely enchanted by his wealth. She treated him as a source of status, an object to admire, rather than a partner to challenge. A small part of me felt a flicker of pity for them both. Not for him, not for her, but for the empty choreography of their lives. I didn't hate him anymore. The anger that once consumed me had dissolved into clarity. He had never been the villain in my story. He had simply been a mirror, and that mirror had reflected everything I refused to remain. I spent a quiet morning alone in my apartment, sipping coffee as the city below buzzed with life. I thought about the years I had lost trying to shrink, the countless nights spent pretending that love required erasure. I remembered my small-town roots, the little girl who had dreamed of love and success without ever imagining the work it would take to claim them. And I smiled, not out of nostalgia but out of recognition. I had become that woman, strong, independent, and whole. Deciding it was time for closure, I returned to my hometown for the first time in nearly a decade. The streets smelled of familiar rain and freshly baked bread, the memories layered over each corner. I visited my mother's favorite school, the one that had always supported her students despite limited resources. With a quiet ceremony, I gifted a scholarship in her name, ensuring that someone else could rise with opportunity that had once seemed out of reach. It wasn't a display. It wasn't a performance. It was a gesture of gratitude, reflection, and the culmination of my journey. Walking through the schoolyard, listening to the laughter and chatter of students, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. My past, my pain, and even the man who had once controlled me had become part of a tapestry that made me who I was. Forgiveness wasn't for him. It was for me. I didn't need reconciliation to feel whole. I didn't need apologies or recognition. I needed only acknowledgement of the life I had fought for and the woman I had become. Sitting on a familiar bench, I closed my eyes and let the memories wash over me. The humiliation, the betrayals, the secret nights building my empire. All of it was part of my story, and each chapter had led to this serenity. I realized that resentment had no place in my life now. Instead, there was acceptance, growth, and a quiet joy that came from knowing I had chosen myself above anyone else. Later, I returned to my office, overlooking the city I now called home. My hands rested on the same laptop that had once been my lifeline, my escape, and my sanctuary. I smiled at the reflection of the woman in the screen, confident, accomplished, and free. The mirror Daniel had once held up to me was no longer needed. I had become my own reflection, powerful and unwavering, and that was enough. As evening fell, I walked through my apartment, pausing at the window to watch the city lights twinkle. I whispered to myself a promise I had long carried silently: to continue building, to continue giving, and to continue living on my terms. The past was a memory, not a prison, and for the first time, I felt entirely at peace. Morning light filters through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse, casting long, golden streaks across the minimalist space. The skyline stretches endlessly beyond, a tapestry of possibility and freedom. I wake slowly, stretching, savoring the quiet hum of a life entirely my own. No demands, no judgment, no reminders of who I used to be. Just space, clarity, and the steady rhythm of my own heartbeat. I make coffee, lean against the counter, and watch the city wake. The cars below crawl along streets I once thought of as mundane. Now, every detail feels rich with significance because I understand the meaning of true abundance. It isn't measured in material symbols, in diamonds or yachts or curated status. That was the luxury Daniel taught me, but it was hollow, fleeting, and dependent on approval. I smile at the memory of his smirk, the subtle contempt, and the nights I once spent shrinking to fit him. Now, luxury is quiet. It is the space to make decisions without hesitation, to act without fear, to live in alignment with my values. It is waking up knowing that my worth isn't dictated by someone else's standards or whims. My wealth, yes, is considerable, a testament to months of relentless work and ingenuity, but it is secondary. The true richness is the life I've built for myself. Boundaries respected, creativity nurtured, and autonomy guaranteed. I glance at the laptop on the table, a quiet relic of late nights filled with strategy and courage. It reminds me of the path I forged in shadows, of the empire I built silently, and of the victories he never saw coming. Every notification, every sale, every message of gratitude from women inspired by my journey is a jewel far brighter than any diamond he ever flaunted. I step toward the window and breathe in deeply, letting the cool air fill me with a sense of calm authority. Peace and self-respect, these are the currencies I now treasure. They are impervious to gossip, infidelity, or manipulation. They cannot be taken, only earned, and I have earned them, every painstaking step of the way. I lean back into the sunlight, letting the cityscape stretch before me like a canvas of endless possibilities. I think of him, of the life I left behind, and of the mirror he once held up to me. He taught me a version of luxury, glittering, superficial, and conditional. I have learned another, one measured in freedom, dignity, and inner strength. And as the skyline shimmers in the early morning glow, I whisper to myself with a quiet, unshakable conviction. He taught me luxury meant diamonds and cars. I learned it meant peace and self-respect.